Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. My name is Joey Weaver. He is Mike McDaniel. Mike, we're heading to Louisville, talking about my Cardinals tonight. Tell us about who we've got here with us to talk about them.
Friend of the show, Mark Ennis, 93.9 The Ville. Mark, what's going on, man?
It's good to be back with you guys, man. I'm ready for football season. It seems like it's been a really long off season around here.
Sure has for pretty much every ACC program other than like maybe three of them. So appreciate you coming back and joining us here. We're looking forward to an exciting 2023 with Louisville. You know, we talked to you back in March, and so some of this ground is stuff we've already covered, but obviously coming into year one with Jeff Brohm, the way that happened really felt like it was incredibly fortuitous for Louisville with Scott Satterfield picking up and leaving. Jeff Brohm coming off of a division championship, if I'm remembering right, for Purdue, and felt like, you know, the time had come for him to come home to Louisville. Was going to ask you, with the way that all went down, and the more that I think about it at this point, if Scott Satterfield had not raised his hand and said, I'm leaving going to Cincinnati, I figure he would still be the head coach at Louisville at this point. Am I right in thinking that, or was there any momentum there to potentially fire him and make that happen themselves?
You know, not by the end of the year, like after around the bowl game. You know, even though the Kentucky game didn't go well, and they finished 7-5, there was a really good recruiting class that you figured they would be able to hold on to. So there really wasn't momentum to fire him, but it was about as dreadful of a middle as there could have been. There wasn't anything egregious to fire him, but there was nothing to hang your hat on with him either. And Louisville was basically going to be, I think, in a no-win situation. They were going to have to do like some of these, even when Jim Harbaugh kind of took a little bit of a pay cut or something like that, it was going to have to be something where you just sort of paused this contract for a year. They weren't going to buy him out, but they weren't going to give him a raise and an extension either. And it was looking like it was a no-win situation for Josh Hurd, the athletic director, and then basically Scott just solved it for them in a way that no one could have envisioned when it happened. So, you know, the long answer to your question is, I don't know. I don't know what they would have done, and he basically saved them from a no good answer situation.
There were a lot of parallels I saw in the Satterfield situation. Of course, I'm a Virginia Tech alum, Mark. A lot of parallels in the Satterfield situation to the Justin Fuente situation, except Virginia Tech had to eat the buyout. You know, they had to pay that buyout money, and they were in that point where they weren't sure what they were going to do either. Satterfield just kind of coming out of nowhere and just up and leaving Cincinnati. I remember it was like real early morning. I woke up and I was like, wait a minute, Satterfield's not the coach of Louisville anymore? Like, what is going on? This is a gift, an absolute gift.
I think it was the Monday right after the end of the season.
Yeah,
I think it was that quick.
Just a gift for Louisville. And then obviously Jeff Brohm, a lot more interested. And not that he wasn't interested before, just the timing, what he was building at Purdue, and just the time didn't make sense. Now he's in, right? He's in this role, and Louisville fans have wanted him in this role for half a decade, right? And now he's here, and expectations are pretty high in year one. How has Brohm, you know, coming in from a messaging standpoint, preached as far as building this program and, you know, hitting the ground running, and how does he feel about where things are at now entering year one and kind of what he's taking over with?
Yeah, you know, I don't think he's done any kind of talking down of expectations or anything like that. You know, and he certainly hasn't started off with any kind of this is a rebuild, you know, or anything like that, or, you know, I'm going to need you to be patient or any of that stuff. He has not shied away from the idea of whatever it is that he has inherited. We can do something with this year one, and I think to add to that, part of that at least is the realization: how many years are we going to get Kentucky and Notre Dame at home and not have Florida State, not have Clemson, not have North Carolina on the roster? Like he realizes probably don't even have to be a whole lot better than you were a year ago. You're probably going to win 9 games, you know, in year one. And if you win the right 9 games, you might make the ACC championship game that way. So he hasn't shied away from it. And where I think he started to tell a little bit after spring, I expected a little bit of movement with transfers and such, but I thought they felt good kind of about where they were. And instead, they were very, very active, and they brought in another quarterback, and they brought in 3 more offensive linemen, which I was surprised that they did. And that told me, like, they don't want to have the opportunity in year one derailed by a single injury. Like, they wanted to make sure they could go all in, like, right in year one. So I think they have high expectations for this year.
Well, and I think that probably answers my question to a certain degree. If the expectations are high within the program and they're trumpeting it, I mean, again, like you said and kind of alluded to, there's been some fanfare around this program possibly making some noise, being a dark horse program to make the ACC championship game or even win the whole league. Is the fan base, from what you can see, is the fan base split at all on like cautious optimism versus like full on, we're winning 10 games this year, kind of, shameless optimism, or is it all, is it all pretty heavy optimism across the board?
Yeah, I gotta say, like, there really you could almost always count on there being, a healthy kind of bottom layer of people who be like, whatever the optimism is, they sort of pull it down a little bit. I mean, I don't know where those people are right now. It's been a long time since there's been like unrestrained optimism, I guess is probably the best way of saying it. Charlie's last 2 years, I think you had a good bit of that. In some of Bobby's early years, there was a little bit of that. But it's been a good 5-6 years since there really was just, I think, faith that you're going to win or always have a chance to win because of the coach. And I think that's the biggest thing that you never got with Scott. I think there was a floor below which they would never fall with him. But I don't think there was ever a single time where it felt like, man, that was really clever what they did there. They wouldn't have won this game if he wasn't the coach. Like, I don't think I ever did that. And I think that there is an expectation of being able to do that with Jeff, like there has been with previous Louisville coaches that we're just missing when Scott was here because he didn't show that.
All right, so quarterback position is interesting, not because Louisville doesn't have the quarterback position figured out, just because of the history of Jack Plummer and Jeff Brohm, right? Jack Plummer was the quarterback under Jeff Brohm at Purdue. He transfers out of Purdue, goes to Cal, and now ends up back with Brohm and with his younger brother, of course, Brian Brohm, the offensive coordinator, now at Louisville. What are expectations for Jack Plummer, and do you think it's going to look pretty similar to how it looked at Purdue, which was, just kind of okay until Aiden O'Connell took over and just kind of won that job, seized that job? Is there a feeling that it's going to be just kind of like, say, business as usual, or is he going to be maybe a different quarterback now and in a new place in the same offense?
Yeah, I think it's, if he was just sort of quarterback A, like off the pile, I don't know how optimism would necessarily be, but the fact that he has years of experience in this offense, I think really ratcheted up everybody's expectations for where they'd be able to be, like, right off the bat. Like, because if you at least have the quarterback, of all people, not having to learn the new offense, like, it makes everything better. Every rep is better. Because he already knows what to do too, and I think has been really forthcoming about, like, feeling like he kind of wasted the opportunity at Purdue, and really feels like he has something to prove. And I thought, when he got here, there wasn't going to be a lot of competition for him, except for Pierce Clarkson, the pretty highly touted freshman, early enrolled, but then he hurt his foot. But then after spring ball to bring in Brady Allen, at first I was thinking, like, man, do they still want competition? But there's been nothing even close to a hint of anybody sort of alluding to someone other than Plummer being the guy. Like, he is the guy. And whatever they've done behind him, I don't think it's because they don't have faith in him. They really do seem to believe in him.
When we talked in March, Mark, we talked about potentially seeing something similar to what we saw with Jeff when he was in his playing days under, I believe it was Schnellenberger. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then we also talked about his brother Brian playing for Jeff and for Bobby Petrino, where in both cases they were not the starter. They were, the underclassmen, kind of the backup. But in a lot of cases they were getting 1 to 2 drives a game, getting some real live reps against real live competition. And we talked about that being a potential thing with Pierce Clarkson, but bringing in Brady Allen, bringing in Harrison Bailey, is Clarkson still the clear like number 2 guy, where that might still be in the plans, or has there been a shakeup there where somebody else might be the backup and maybe get a little bit less of that type of attention?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I'm glad that you remembered that I said that because I don't think that anymore. I thought I think the last time we spoke that in spring it would be Plummer, and then it would be you Brock Doman and Evan Conley or holdovers, but I didn't expect them to be factors, and they're not. And then I thought Pierce Clarkson would be kind of here to push Plummer, and maybe would benefit from having spring, and then he really didn't get to do spring at all. And they brought in Brady Allen, and I think Brady Allen has been fine, but Pierce Clarkson has had a very good fall camp, and even though he didn't really get to do much in the spring, has had plenty of days where he was definitely the second guy, and so I think there's a chance that Pierce Clarkson still plays. I think there's a chance he really does legitimately win the number 2 job. As the backup there. I don't think they're going to go out of their way for like a package for him to play, like I may have thought coming out of spring. But I do think there's a chance he's just the backup because he's had a really, really nice fall.
I mean, strength of the roster, it feels like you could point to the offensive line, right? The offensive line does have a lot of talent returning. Caleb Chandler, all ACC guard, not returning, but the rest of the line's back. I mean, it seems like they're returning a lot up front. War Jordan in the backfield, right? There's obviously a very good playmaker there. And then if Plummer ends up being the guy at quarterback, or at least, being good enough while Clarkson gets enough reps in practice under his belt to maybe play him a little bit more, it seems like Louisville is going to have some options offensively. Do you see the strength, at least, of the offense being up front, or is it somewhere else?
I think by the end of the year we'll say it's wide receiver, but I understand if anyone is hesitant to say that right now because a lot of these guys are new. But I think based on what I've been hearing about Chris Bell, who's a freshman who played just a little bit last year, has really shown out. Jamari Thrash, who came in, Kevin Coleman, who transferred in, both of those guys. Some of the freshmen that enrolled early, and I think were really impressive guys. I understand if there are questions. And Amari Huggins-Bruce is back too. Had a nice 2 first years here. I think they've got a lot of really nice players there. I understand we've not really seen much in the way of kind of an exotic passing offense when Scott was here, so I understand not calling it that now, but I really do believe by the end of the year, there are legitimately 4 or 5 guys that I think can play for just about anybody, and that'll be seen as a team strength by the end.
Were you surprised at all, Mark? I guess I didn't. When he came in and took over, I feel like the roster maybe wasn't in as good a condition as it could have been, but it wasn't in poor condition, and yet it seemed like there was a ton of transfer portal activity from Brohm and his staff, upon taking the job. Were you surprised by that at all, or were you fully expecting that this was going to be a total overhaul of the roster, kind of to the degree that it has been?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I was surprised a little bit, but I don't think that it really represented dissatisfaction or kind of ill will with a lot of these guys. I don't think it's your typical new guys coming in and running off guys who don't fit. I think there were several of those guys they would have loved to have stayed who really just got the bag, so to speak. And with a new coach and all that. And then I think that Scott Satterfield had very specific tastes in terms of types of players to play various roles. And I do think that a good chunk of the transfers out and in had to do with Jeff's preference for, I think, edge players and what's going to be asked of offensive linemen and running backs both. Really kind of called for different kinds of guys, and there was maybe a little bit more willingness to go ahead and just do that flushing now than try to gradually adjust with guys who don't really fit. They just go ahead and do it all with the transition. So I don't anticipate it being like this on kind of a regular basis.
You mentioned kind of the pass rushers in particular, and you can't help but look at Louisville's defense and notice that they just lost a lot of really quality players, right? Yaya Diaby's gone, Yasir Abdullah, Momo Sanogo, etc. What's the level of concern defensively? Because I feel like, Louisville has recruited well. They recruited well they had like you mentioned off the top, a good recruiting class coming in under Satterfield. They, from a depth standpoint, they hit the portal, they attacked the portal hard. But with all that said, like there is a lot of production going out the door. So what's the level of concern with the defense, and who are some playmakers, especially from a pass rush standpoint, to keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think this is by far the biggest question on the roster. I'll just call it kind of front seven, and it's twofold because I think they lost good players, like you mentioned, with Yaya Diaby and Yasir Abdullah, Momo Sanogo, and others. They lost good players, but also by the end of last year, like they were pretty nasty, like scheme wise. They had really done a good job crafting run blitzes and various things that really fit that group of guys. And so you've got the mystery of sort of no one's really seen this defense that Ron English is bringing in. This sort of version of the 4-2-5, and no one's seen a lot of these guys play the roles that they're going to be playing. So, the answer is I don't know, at least right away, if it'll be anywhere close to as good as it was last year, just because it really is going to be hard to replace guys who were as good as those guys were a year ago. They brought in Stephen Herron, who's a local kid who played for 3 years at Stanford. They feel really good about him. Ashton Galati didn't get a lot of pub a year ago, but he is like the sort of emerging guy at the defensive end spot. They're just a huge, really athletic kid that people feel really good about. And then they got a lot of options inside. The guy that I would be watching out for, if he can get and stay healthy, Jermaine Lole, brought him in from Arizona State. He was kind of an all Pac-12 guy the year before, and then got hurt he missed most of his year before, and then got hurt in the very first game last year and never got to play. But he's a pretty athletic, kind of big athletic guy that would really be disruptive inside. If he's there, then I think you start feeling a lot better about the front seven. But still, without question, the biggest question on the team.
Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful, wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They have t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies. They got a couple of three-quarter shirts. They got buttons, stickers, all sorts of things. Things for men, women, children, something for the whole family. Every Georgia Tech fan in your life can use something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. They've got some new things all the time coming. Recently came out with some new player shirts. Jerseys, I guess as the kids would call them. Things with a logo on the front, a number on the front, and a number on the back, along with a name. They got shirts for both Zach Pyron as well as Dante Smith, who kind of project to be Georgia Tech's starting quarterback and running back this year. So if you want to support those players, I believe they get some NIL money out of it too. So just keep that in mind for what it's worth. They've got the Juniors Grill shirt. They've got all sorts of great products there. They've also recently come out with a clearance section. So if you're looking for some t-shirts or a couple of hoodies for a slightly lower price point, go check out the clearance section. Once again, it is section103.com or at section_103 on Instagram. Give them a follow. Check it out. All things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. Again, using the official team colors, the official word marks, everything. It is all officially licensed. It is super comfortable, super high quality. I love mine. You will love yours as well. Check out the performance wear if you're looking for things to keep you cool here during the summer. In any case, one more time, that is section103.com, the internet's best place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. That's it for now. Let's get back to the show. Mark, as you look at the roster, is there a single spot that you would look at where you would say maybe there's like a depth concern, where there's, you feel pretty good about the starters that are playing, but there starts to be a pretty quick drop-off if there's an injury or two that pile up and you have to play significant snaps with the backups there?
Yeah. I think it's safety now that MJ Griffin's out. I think you start to worry if anything happens now. I think with him, you really did feel like you had some pretty good depth there. So that's probably a bigger question than it would have been even a week ago. But I think really overall, the whole defensive line I'll say I think I have depth concerns just because I'm not exactly sure who the right guys are for each of these spots until we start seeing this defense actually out on the field. And Ashton Gallatti's never been the guy. I think he's benefited from Diaby being on the other side and Abdullah being on the outside and that sort of thing. Now he's going to be the focal point. We've never seen that and how he's going to handle that sort of thing. So I think in terms of numbers and known names, safety I think is an issue, but there might be depth issues because I'm not really sure they've got the same caliber of guys that they had a year ago on the defensive line.
I don't want to ask this as a conference realignment question. I want to kind of, because I hate talking about it and I'm tired of reading about it, but I'm curious, someone who's been around the program like you have, Mark, and you're on the radio all the time talking to all the fans and everything. What's the ceiling? Like, what's the expectation in terms of, I'm not just talking about like this season, but what do fans believe the ceiling is for the Louisville football program long term? Because it just feels like in the era of conference realignment, I feel like a lot of schools are just kind of reassessing where they're at and kind of where they're going to fall, when the time comes and, if they have to head to a different conference. So I'm just curious, like, where do Louisville fans and media like kind of expect the program to be, maybe not just right now, but maybe in the next 5 years in terms of wins and losses, ceiling, consistent New Year's Six team? Like, where are the expectations around the football program?
Now, especially that you don't have divisions, I think the expectation, it's not outrageous. Like, I don't think Louisville fans truly expect Louisville to develop into peak Clemson or Florida State or something. Like, there are things about them that will never be true of Louisville, and I think people here are savvy enough to understand that, and that's not the expectation. Louisville, at its best, is always a bit overachieving, but I think that like top end, what people would just love to see is what happens if Jeff Brohm just stays here for 15 years. I think most people here think Louisville, like at its best, with a guy that wants to be here and is trying to shape this thing, and it's not just sort of the next rung on the ladder or anything like that. I think Louisville fans think it could be like Virginia Tech at its best, where you have that crazy run of 10-ish win seasons. They even had one chance to play for a national championship, but those teams always had a style. They had a consistent way of playing and style of player that you came to expect from them and that sort of thing. I think that's Louisville's like absolute best, is being like that. Maybe you get lucky, in one of those seasons or something. But I think that's where I would say like that's what people think Louisville can be at its best.
Yeah, and you've mentioned before, Mark, that Louisville historically, I think it's nobody has been there for more than 6 years. I think you said it's always been very transient relative to other programs like that.
With the exception of Howard Schnellenberger, basically, that's it. They've never had that guy, and it's always been such a funny dichotomy here because for basketball you had two coaches for like 55 years or whatever it was with Denny Crum and Rick Pitino, like Hall of Fame guys who had options, weren't from here, couldn't leave, and then you just couldn't get a football coach to stay, and hopefully you get off that treadmill for a little while.
Yep. I was going to ask you too, and I forget if I had mentioned this maybe in the one we did in March, but something I had thought about, for years as we've talked about Jeff Brohm being a potential Louisville head coaching candidate was that I felt like Brohm and what he wants to do, the way that he wants to design and run his team, I've always felt like that fits better at Louisville than it did at Purdue. A guy who wants to throw the ball, have a fairly passing-centric offense. I don't feel like that works in the Big Ten West as well as it does in the ACC. I don't feel like recruiting out of Florida and such works as well at Purdue as it does at Louisville. Like, have you ever gotten that sense, even before all of this really kind of came to be, like that Louisville just seems like it would fit better for what he's trying to do and his preferences as a coach?
100%. And I think I would add that Louisville fans have a preferred style, that Louisville fans, I can still vividly remember that it didn't quite get to the point of like not being happy that they were winning, but it got real close. Charlie is the only guy at Louisville that's won where people were like, this is kind of boring because he just loved defense and, and it was pretty straightforward. But before that, I mean, it's Howard Schnellenberger, one of the best offensive minds ever in football. John L. Smith is a tremendous, crazy, but he's a tremendous offensive mind. Bobby Petrino again, like offense and a certain kind of offense, particularly like throwing the ball. And Louisville's history is filled with quarterbacks that are crazy good for a place like Louisville. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of excitement for it. Yes, I do think it's a better fit, but it also is like what people are just dying to watch. Like people here just want to watch that whole style of doing things. Scott never really got that either. Is a lot. Like I keep saying.
Taking a look at the schedule, Mark, we've touched on this briefly, but no Florida State, Clemson, Notre Dame at home. Sets up pretty nicely. Like that's been the narrative in the offseason. It's Louisville could win 9 or 10 games, and it might not necessarily mean they're a 9 and 10 win team like under Brohm in year one. Or so it's like, look at this schedule and show me where the losses are. And the more I look at it, the more I wonder, where are these losses going to come? Really just a couple tricky spots. I mean, I think the 3-game stretch end of September through at Pitt before the bye is probably the toughest segment of the schedule, but this feels like a schedule that sets up quite nicely.
Oh, the schedule is a gift. I mean, it truly is. Don't play Florida State, Clemson, or North Carolina. Get your rival game at the end of the year at home. Get Notre Dame at home. And even 2 of the road games are not even at the home stadium. Georgia Tech's at Mercedes-Benz or whatever it is. And Indiana is in Indianapolis. There'll be twice as many Louisville fans as IU fans. And so, like, it couldn't have been designed any more friendly. And like I said, I think a little bit earlier, they're not even going to have to be appreciably better as a team than they were a year ago, and they'll win more games than they did. Just this schedule is a gift. I think the trips to Pitt and Miami and NC State are all going to be really tough, and then I think the Notre Dame and Kentucky games at home will be really tough. And basically, the difference between say 9-3 and 7-5 or whatever is going to be how they do in those 5 games. The better they do in those 5 games, the better their record will be. I think they'll win the others. They get, IU, Georgia Tech, Murray State, and both Virginias, and then it's just about what can you tack on to that.
A couple of quirks I'll call out. As you mentioned, Mark, I mean, only 3 true road games. 2 other technically road games are neutral site games, and I mean, I will point out that Georgia Tech being at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, that's like a mile and change down the road from Bobby Dodd Stadium. But from the standpoint of being able to fill it and ticket sales and all that, I mean, Louisville's going to get a pretty good deal on that. Being able to fill that stadium pretty well, I would venture. But then the other games, I mean, the other thing is if I'm counting right, 4 of the 12 games are weeknight games. So you start on a Friday night, then Thursday night against Murray State, and then a Friday at NC State, and then later Thursday against Virginia. Just kind of a quirky schedule. The thing I was kind of looking at too is, well, we talked about Clemson and their schedule. There's a couple of like spots that were maybe a little bit treacherous, look ahead spots, let down spots, that kind of thing. I don't know that I'm really seeing anything here, again, other than maybe the 3-game stretch, end of September through early October, at NC State, Notre Dame, and at Pittsburgh. Are there any spots on this schedule that make you nervous at all of like, well, maybe here's a chance to drop a dumb one? Because I don't know that I'm seeing it.
That's the funny thing about it. I think nothing jumps out as like I could see. Of course, I couldn't have picked what happened with, let's say, with Boston College a year ago either. But like nothing jumps out as, oh, here is a place where it just looks like here are ones they ought to win, and then here are a bunch of 50-50 to 60-40 kinds of games, and it just doesn't look like any that look dangerous. Although I think if you talk to enough Louisville fans, this opener is scary, just because we don't really know what it's going to look like when he totally gets to put his imprint on things. And they're being pretty tight-lipped about who the quarterback might be. And I think Louisville fans themselves have a spooked memory of 2017 going to face Jeff Brohm and Purdue in his first game at Purdue with Lamar coming back, and Louisville was preseason ranked and all that. And Louisville had to hold on to win that game in the last possession. And so just what a team in their first year as the opponent. I think there's a lot of trepidation that this one could be one that they trip over to start the year. I don't know how Tech fans feel about that, but there's fear.
I've said a couple times that if you want to get this Louisville team at some point, it's get them early. So I think from a scheduling standpoint for Georgia Tech, it's nice playing that game first off the bat. But I hear what you're saying, though.
I feel like we've gone through a bunch of these schedules in the previews, and it always comes up as you get Louisville in September. That's pretty good. And then if you're in Virginia Tech's case, it was like, you get to go to Louisville in November? That really sucks. If you're going to get Jeff Brohm in year one, get him early. But then again, I think, Joey, to answer your question, the only spot I could see, and this isn't even a look ahead, this is just because you're coming off a bye, that Duke game on October 28th, Duke's really well coached and super annoying, and Riley Leonard was real good last year.
That's a good spot.
That's it. And the only reason I say that is because you never know how your team's going to look after a bye. And we've seen some weird, especially watching as much ACC football as the three of us watch, we've seen some weird shit coming out of bye weeks with teams across the conference. Maybe there would be a spot, but then again, you get that at home, right? So I don't know. I guess if you had to pick one, I'd like that Georgia Tech spot, Mark, but that's the only other spot on the schedule I can look at. And I'm like, that might be a weird game.
I think Duke is a really good call. I think you're right. I think that's a better one that I should have maybe called a little bit more attention to. Mike Elko's a great coach. I mean, just did a tremendous job right off the bat there. And it's crazy to talk about that, which it was every bit as good as we're describing. And then to see what's happening at the two Virginias, it's they are a disaster, both of them. And I know there's been tragedy, so I'm not making light of that. It was disaster before that, and it's crazy to have mentioned peak Virginia Tech as the goal or whatever earlier, just to see how easily that can be unraveled. We're experiencing it here on the men's basketball side, same kind of thing. But it's not automatic, and it's like not self-perpetuating, and it's crazy how quickly it can sort of get off the rails.
One other thing I'll call out is it's a little similar to something I think that came up in the Syracuse preview. Is we mentioned those 3 games in a row, and I'll even throw in the Boston College game before that. That's 4 straight games against what I would consider very physical programs. I think that's the other thing that maybe you get a little nervous about there in the middle of the schedule is if injuries were to start to pile up. I think that's maybe the only other thing to be a little bit concerned about.
I don't.
Yeah, but
you don't think so? You disagree?
Like Big Ten. Well, even the Big Ten days, like those teams at Purdue, they played some pretty gross kind of physical Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and I think they weathered it okay.
Held up all right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's fair enough.
I was just going to say, I look at this and I just don't see how it could be worse than 8-4. I think I'm going to say 8-4 just because the question marks on defense, and then maybe, Jack Plummer's a fine quarterback, but, I don't know 1,000% if, he'll stand the test of time, so to speak, right? I don't know. You have to really talk yourself into anything worse than that. I just don't really... I mean, just from a talent standpoint, Louisville's more talented than almost their entire schedule. NC State is a comp. Notre Dame is probably more talented, but you get them at home. at Pitt. Pitt's a tough game. Pitt's a tough team. That's a tough game on the road.
That's going to be a really hard
But I
game,
struggle to find, and then Kentucky at the end of the year is Kentucky. So I'm probably gonna go 8-4. I don't know. I could see I mean, I guess they play 5 games in September. I could see maybe a 4-1 start. Maybe the loss being at NC State, and then Notre Dame and Pitt. I mean, could Louisville be 4-3 and then not lose until Kentucky? Yeah. Like, I think the expectation would be coming out the bye week, they wouldn't lose until Kentucky. I don't really think going to Miami is really that tough of a spot in mid-November. First of all, you're not worried about going on the road to play Miami. Secondly, who knows, and Joey and I have said this on a couple different previews, who knows what Miami's going to be in mid-November.
No kidding.
Like, it's a Cristobal team, and they're trying to do a new culture. It's still Miami, right? It's still Miami. They got, historically, some quit in them in November if the thing's not going right. I'm going to go with 8-4, and I think it could definitely be better, more like 9-3. I think just by default, and it, from looking across the conference, we've been trying to figure out who the third best team is, Mark, in the ACC. Like, we're just not sure, like on paper, we're just not sure who that is. And to be honest with you, I'm not even sure if Louisville, from a like personnel standpoint, is the third best team in the ACC, but I think they could have the third best record. I mean, could they backdoor their way into an ACC championship game just by nature of their schedule? Yeah, like I think they definitely could. What you said earlier was right on the money. If they show me what the losses are, if they win the right games, they could be in the conference championship by the time it's all said and done. It's definitely possible. It's definitely a possibility for sure.
Yeah, if they go 9-3,
Mark,
and two of the losses are two of the losses are Notre Dame and Kentucky, like they're going to make the ACC championship game because they would have every tiebreaker.
Yeah, they'll be in.
And not only do they not play Florida State, Clemson, Carolina, all 3 of those all play each other. So, I mean, there's opportunities. Yeah. I think you look at this year, the schedule. If you just make Louisville about as good as a year ago, they'll go 8-4, and if they're a little better than a year ago, they'll go 9-3. And if they're about the same or just have some bad luck, they'll go 7-5. Like that's about how it breaks down. It's hard to envision them being a lot better. Like if everything's just fantastic, they could go 10-2. But I don't even locally, even in enthusiasm, we don't hear that.
Do you have an official record prediction, Mark, that you're willing to stick to?
I've been saying 9-3. Like I think they're going to get the better end of what we've been talking about. But I can't tell you that I know with certainty that I'm which 3 I think are the 3. I just sort of flutter between NC State, Pitt, Kentucky, Notre Dame, and Miami, and just like which of those. I think I'm basically saying they'll go 2-3 in those games, and that's 9-3. And then take care of the others. Yep. And that doesn't even feel out on a limb, and it's still over their like season total at 8.5. But it doesn't even feel like it's all that reckless of a bet.
One other thing I will mention that I just noticed a second ago. By the way, speaking of spots on this schedule, we do realize where that Miami game sits on the schedule for Miami, right?
The week after Florida State, right?
That's the week after the Florida State game where I think that they might get trounced a little bit. And a Miami team coming off a trouncing by Florida State seems to be easy pickings in recent years. So that doesn't hurt things at all for Louisville's case either.
I think you said it best earlier. With Miami, like there's no telling where they'll be, like in the head, by the time that Louisville plays them. They could be rolling, and it could be a real buzzsaw down there. Or they could be what they were a year ago.
Yeah. I want to say 9-3. I feel like I'm going to go with 8-4 though, and just
I could see being safe and going 8-4.
Yeah.
I don't think that's crazy.
Definite upside there, and like we said, I mean, if everything kind of clicks and goes well, I mean, double digits is not off the table at all. And it is interesting to me that I would say probably the two toughest games on the schedule are out of conference games, like you kind of were alluding to there, Mark, with Notre Dame and Kentucky. Like, it is not off the table at all for them to run the table in the ACC games, and find themselves in Charlotte in early December.
Yeah, they could finish in the top two, but not be one of the two best teams.
Yep.
It sets up great for that to be a possibility.
Yep.
And then the interesting part will be, what does year 2 look like? And I haven't looked at Louisville's schedule, Mark, in year 2, so I don't know. This is me kind of
it's a little harder,
driving blind here.
Yeah,
but I would assume my assumption would be it's a little bit harder, right? Yeah. So if it is a little bit harder, then yeah. And what do the fans do, right? If Louisville were to go to the higher end this year, right? If they go 10-2, and then let's say Louisville has a better team on the field next year, but has a worse record, like how do fans react to that? That would be, from a third party, neutral, doesn't care what Louisville does or doesn't do. I'd be really interested in seeing what that looks like. From a, let's see if the fans go crazy on social media. I would be looking forward to there.
Well, look, I think if you ask the average fan, how fun would it be, or how much would you like to go through the agony of year 2 not being as good as the 10-2 was in year 1, they'd be like, I'll take that problem. That sounds like a good problem. I want to do that. So,
Fair. Fair enough.
If that's what happens, I think we'll take it after everything that's gone on the last couple of years. But look, I think I get what you're saying. It's a totally fair point, and I think Jeff's going to get a lot of leeway just because of how beloved he is, and then especially if they really do make year 1, he's going to have a lot of leeway for a long time.
Yeah, get that much more leash that way. Yep,
I'd imagine.
Mike, that's all I got from Mark. Anything else?
No, Mark, appreciate you joining us as always. As we like to do, just give you an opportunity to go ahead and plug your stuff.
Sure. Listen, we're on 93.9 The Ville Monday through Friday here in Louisville, and you can just go to 939theville.com, listen to us on the podcast too. Ready for the freaking season to get here. So I think I'm going to be in Atlanta for this one. We're still trying to work that out, so hopefully be able to make that trip.
Absolutely. Are you doing post-game shows again this year, Mark?
I am.
I listened in to to one of them. I won't bring up which one it was because it was a pretty brutal loss, and it was kind of cathartic hearing you talk and take calls and such after the game. But in any case, that's another fun, a good fan experience.
Those are the ones
share
people tend to remember.
Go check them out after games. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Well, Mark, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. We'd love to have you back on sometime.
Your time. Yeah, anytime, you guys.
Absolutely. All right, Mike, let's get out of here. Let's go preview some more teams. In the meantime, we're on Twitter at FTRSJoey, at Mike McDaniel SI, together at BC Podcast ACC. Go find him on Twitter at Mark Ennis, all one word, or on X or whatever we're calling it these days. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, all those other good places you go find your podcast. Go find us there. You can send us an email to the longest email address known to man, basketballconferencepodcast@gmail.com.
Nailed it.
Thank you. We're also on the social medias, Mike.
Joey.
Yeah.
Joseph. Facebook.com/basketball conference rate review. Find some of our podcasts there.
Please do.
Instagram also at BC Podcast ACC. YouTube at the ACC Football Podcast, I believe.
Absolutely. Please do. Am I forgetting anything? I think that's it.
You threw me off by calling me Mark. I'm not going to lie to you. I kind of stumbled there a little bit. I tripped over myself, tripped over my words, but I'm ready for the next preview, Joey. We are almost done and almost into a season preview ourselves, which we'll be recording here sometime.
That's right. We're on the home stretch here. We are working on a one final wrap-up preview that we will do before the official Week 1 preview, which is coming your way very, very soon. So keep it tuned here. We will get you ready for the season, and then we will be hitting the ground running with Week 1 preview here very, very shortly. So keep it tuned here.
Yep. A lot of podcast content coming, as usual.
That's right. That's right. My wife is thrilled about the amount of time I'm spending doing it. So
I was going to say, we can talk about that off air. That's you know what? Sounds like we're married.
That's right. That's right. Are you saying like we're both individually married or like married to each other? Because some days.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a question for our respective wives, I think.
There you go. Valid question. Yeah. On that note, Mike, I think that's all I got. Anything else before we get out of here?
Now we're all set. On to the next one.
You want to come preview some more teams?
Do it.
All right. Until next time, for Mr. Mike McDaniel and for Mr. Mark Ennis, I am Joey Weaver. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will talk to you again soon. And until next time, go Cards and go ACC.